Good afternoon. I'm surprised. Everyone's pretty much stayed even though the weather's terrible, so thank you for that. We're going to talk a little bit today, we're going to change gears and talk a little bit about empowering yourselves, and what that means and how that's important to living well with Parkinson's disease. It was briefly mentioned, I'm a physician, but I've also had young onset Parkinson's disease for almost 18 years now. And after resigning my practice about 4 years ago, I've sort of turned to other activities, which include educating patients about lifestyle changes and other attitude modifications that they can make in order to help themselves. So what do I mean by self-empowerment? Well, it's defined in the dictionary as deriving the strength to do something through one's own thoughts and based on the belief that one knows what is best for oneself. Now, this isn't a talk about how to think away your Parkinson's, because unfortunately that isn't the case. I wish it was. We'd have a lot more people in attendance if it was, I'm sure. But this is more or less saying deriving the strength to live better with this disease, regardless of your level of disability, through one's own thoughts and actions, and based on the belief that you know what's best for yourself. So, I stand here saying that I'm empowered, and I really do feel today that I'm empowered. But it wasn't always like this. For me, it was a slow process. My symptoms first began when I was 27. I had just completed my residency in family practice and was expecting my first child. And it started off as a tremor in my right pinky finger, which actually was more medically intriguing than bothersome to me. But as time progressed, it became more and more consistent and constant, so much so that my husband said, listen, he's also a physician. He said, listen, you've got to go get it checked out. So begrudgingly, I went down and consulted a neurologist colleague of mine. And after he puts us through, through the quacking test and all those clinical tests that they do, the casual banter that we had turned more serious as he leaned over the desk and said, I think you have young onset Parkinson's disease. So in my situation, I'm not sure about yours, but in my situation it turned into more kill the messenger kind of attitude. And that unfortunately persisted for a few years. So I just thought his clinical judgment was obviously flawed and I wouldn't send him any patients, but that's the past. But what I did accept from him was a referral to a movement disorder clinic specifically, and one of the top movement disorder specialists in the country. And on the day that I went, I thought I'd be exonerated from the diagnosis, but unfortunately, he confirmed it. So young onset Parkinson's disease at the age of 27. I felt like a freight train hit me. It sort of began a time period, I'd say of a good decade, of fear and denial and anger and secrecy. I was angry that this had come on in a time that I was really actually too busy for it. I didn't have time for a disease when I had a new family practice, a growing family. I have 3 daughters now, a busy social life. It was just too much. It was annoying more than anything else. And despite my protests, it felt like my brain was disengaging from my body. And these are symptoms I'm sure you would understand. It first started in my right hand, went to my right foot, and the left side. The cramping of the toes in the morning, so it's difficult to walk. The nights being just up and restless and exhausted. And that's where I stood. I stood for a very long time focusing on that disability. What would become of my future? Would I be able to continue my career? Would I be there for my children as they went through all their stages of life? Would I have to, would my marriage change? All these questions were my primary focus. Then let's fast forward about 15 years to 2013, 3 daughters later. I was now asked to speak at the World Parkinson Congress about living a positive life after a diagnosis of Parkinson's, something that truly was unforeseeable in the years previous. My co-presenters were Alex Flynn, who's an ultramarathon runner. He had just completed the equivalent of 20 marathons in 10 days. And Rich Clifford, who's a friend of mine, who's a NASA astronaut, and he had flown 2 of his space missions post-diagnosis. So remarkable people, and in fact, I thought they must have, the invitation must have been sent to the wrong person, because here I was with my feet have never left the ground, and while they've been here, they haven't run any marathons. But as we talked more and more, I saw that there was a common thread. And that common thread was the drive and determination not to let this disease rule our lives, to put it into perspective, to be able to move forward and learn to thrive, not just live with this diagnosis. And that was a powerful life lesson for me, but it didn't come easy. It didn't come easy at all. And I'm not minimizing the effects of this disease in any way, shape, or form. I go through the same challenges as you do. But I know that the way I was a number of years ago versus today has been a significant change for me. So how did those change? Well, I just want to share with you a few, I guess, life lessons that Parkinson's has given me. Lesson 1 is acceptance. So he says, every day for me is an uphill struggle. On the positive side, it's great for my glutes. So it's always a positive side. So as I mentioned, I spent a better part of a decade in fear and denial and anger and secrecy. And I didn't like the person I was becoming, to be quite honest with you. I was focused on the glass being half empty rather than half full much of the time. I hadn't really accepted it into part of my life. It was like I said before, it was just an annoyance, a nuisance for me. But it wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It became more and more prevalent. I hated the fact that I had to, time my medication so that I wouldn't have a shaky hand when I went to give an immunization to a child. Or that, simple things like taking blood pressures would be more difficult and had to be more thoroughly planned. Or that the tremor gave me a sense of nervousness when actually I was quite sure in my medical knowledge. And it followed me into home as well, caring for my 3 young children, social and family situations. It was a very difficult time for me. But as I said, I didn't like the person I was becoming anymore. I rarely laughed like I used to laugh. And there was so much to be joyful for when I really looked at my life objectively. So for me, acceptance was the first step in facing this battle. And I don't mean intellectual acceptance. I knew I had Parkinson's. I didn't doubt the doctors that diagnosed me. As a physician, I knew what my symptoms were. I knew they're compatible with the diagnosis. I knew about my medications and possible prognosis, that sort of thing. And I'm also not talking about the type of acceptance that means lie down in defeat. There's nothing you can do about it. It is what it is. Go on with your life. No, that to me is more complacency than acceptance. What I'm talking about is true acceptance. That type of acceptance that allows you to accept and move forward, to put action behind your intention, to put the disease into perspective, to move beyond the disease, so that we can learn to not just live, but thrive despite the diagnosis. And that was very empowering. Lesson 2, optimism is a choice. He says, you tested positive for being too negative. And I think we all, regardless of whether we have Parkinson's, fall into this trap now and again. Actually, a quick anecdote. I personally think Michael J. Fox is probably the poster child for optimism, especially when it comes to this disease. And I had read that he used to tell his kids, choose to have a good day or choose to be happy as they walk out the door. I thought, that's really cool. I'm going to try that. So I tried it a couple times with my children, and the 10-year-old was fine with it. She loved it. She thought, oh, that's kind of cute. My 14 and 17-year-old were just kind of like, okay. Mom and her little sayings is happening again. But that's teenagers. But optimism is a choice. It's not an easy choice by any stretch of the imagination. Most of the time it's not an easy choice. But it is a choice nevertheless. There's one particular quote that I've often referred to by Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a neurologist and psychiatrist at the time of the Holocaust camps. And he said that everything can be taken from a man, but the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, he wrote this publication called Man's Search for Meaning, and his work was based on his experience in not 1 but 3 Nazi death camps. And it was there that he observed that people who had hope for the future or some goal that they wished to attain actually were less likely to succumb in spirit to the brutalization they were subjected to compared to those who had lost all hope. which is a really powerful concept if you think about it. Now, I must clarify at this point, I don't at all liken my journey with Parkinson's to what he went through, where he lost his whole entire family and the nightmare that he had endured. I mean, for me, that's unimaginable and unthinkable. But that premise of saying yes to life despite everything can certainly be extrapolated to our experience with Parkinson's, or any chronic disease for that matter. And that's a really powerful life lesson, your ability to choose your reaction, choose your attitude based on your set of circumstances. I had the power to choose optimism over despair. And I began to understand that the diagnosis was not within my control, but how I was going to face the challenges that this diagnosis would bring was completely mine to determine. And that was a very empowering lesson for me. Lesson 3. It's all about quality of life. He says, I recommend you learn to enjoy the little things in life. The larger things cost more than you have and will take longer than you've got left. That's a little bit depressing, actually. I hope we all have a long time left. Quality of life. Quality of life means to me you're happy. You're satisfied with what you're able to do, and you feel fulfilled. And this translates to your occupational, your recreational, your social life. It also depends on your spiritual, your mental, and your emotional, and your physical health. And what my quality of life, for me, what gives me quality of life, might be the bane of your existence, meaning it doesn't give you quality of life. So it differs from person to person, and only you know what your quality of life goals are. It also differs for me compared to when I was working, right? Different times in your stage of illness, quality of life goals can change. And at this point, I'll just put my doctor's hat back on and kind of confess one thing that a lot of physicians fall into the trap of doing, which is completely unintentional. Oftentimes, we as physicians will treat symptoms instead of the patient. So yes, it is a positive result if I give you a pill that takes away your tremor. But is it actually a successful result if by giving you that pill, I've caused side effects that were worse than the initial symptom, or B, not addressed what was really causing your quality of life to be compromised? Perhaps it wasn't the tremor at all. Maybe it was constipation, which can be a huge issue. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe it was depression. So it's really about quality of life, but that's an immeasurable thing. It's a concept. And only you know what your quality of life goals are. So that really has to be placed in high priority when you are interacting with your medical team. Knowing that you have the ability to determine what your quality of life goals are and share it with your medical team so that they can help you attain that. Because until we find a cure, and I believe we will find a cure, and certainly better treatments, until that day, it's all about quality of life. And we as patients and physicians and healthcare support workers and caregivers have to really put that at top priority. So for me, for example, when I was working, my quality of life occupationally depended on me not shaking as much as I did. So I would take a lot of extra medication so I'd get an hour extra in the clinic that I could work without tremor. Of course, that was causing a lot of side effects and I felt terrible, but for me, at that point, I needed to do that. Now, with me not having regular clinical duties, I don't have to take as much. So quality of life goals will change with the course of your disease, but it's really important to always remember that quality of life is really the most important thing to keep in mind. So if you look in the mirror, he says, I think you'll find I'm one of the most empathetic doctors around. Building your support team. I mean, remember, we're not islands unto ourselves. We do best when we're surrounded by a team of people that have our best interests at heart and have our quality of life at the top of their priority as well. And for everyone, this team will be different. It depends on your age, stage of illness, what symptoms are the most bothersome for you, your socioeconomic state, etc. Medical professionals will make up your support team. primary care physician, I will just put a plug in because that's what I am, that just because you have Parkinson's does not mean that you can't be susceptible to other things. So it's really important for your overall health to be good in order to manage the challenges that this disease presents, which means keeping up with your regular checkups, your regular screening tests like mammograms, PSA, et cetera. You really need to make sure your overall health is good. So primary care physician can obviously help with that. And then the neurologist, movement disorder specialists, physiotherapists are fantastic at helping maintain or improve movement and function. They can help specifically with balance and coordination, fatigue, gait, pain, weakness. Massage therapists through manipulation, manual manipulation, can be extremely helpful when it comes to working out the knots and the muscle tension. Occupational therapists are fantastic in helping optimize your performance in work, leisure, and activities of daily living, such as personal care and mobility, housekeeping, caregiving. And then dietitians are really great as well, particularly since those of us with Parkinson's disease might have weight issues, weight loss, sometimes weight gain. Speech pathology was mentioned earlier in terms of swallowing issues. Peer support is unbelievably important, I have found anyway. I think you have a great group here. I'm not sure how many of you belong in the same support group, but when you meet people that are going through the same life experience as you, there's a bond that's created that sort of transpires the sort of niceties that we have to go through with everyone else. You kind of relate right away. And a professional counselor sometimes, be it financial or otherwise, or for mood issues, which again are very common in Parkinson's disease. So building your support team is an important way for you to empower yourselves, because you need to direct that support team. You're the head of that support team in order to optimize your treatment. You must be an active participant in your management. This is huge. So he says, my doctor told me to start my exercise program very gradually. Today I drove past a store that sells sweatpants. We'll need to do a little bit more than that. You have to be actively involved in the management of your disease in order to live well with Parkinson's. You can't be a passive bystander. You have to actively be seeking solutions to problems as they arise and taking a proactive approach to life in general. It takes work. It takes, be it physical commitment or emotional growth, it takes work in order to be that active participant, but you have to take care of those variables that are within your control. Because for the most part, we had no control over this diagnosis, but there are certain things in our life that we do have control over if we take the time to do that. So that means lifestyle changes, such as making sure you're on a healthy diet, that you get the proper amount of sleep, that you try and reduce your stress. Also exercise, which I'll speak about in just a second. What I say is basically extreme self-care. So you're taking care of your physical, your emotional, and your spiritual well-being and health. And that's vital for people with Parkinson's disease, taking the time for yourself, taking the time to care for yourself. Scheduling is very important. And we talked a little bit about the problems that people run into in hospital or in nursing care facilities. I mean, I tend to run into it at home, and that's my own doing, because, someone needs their hair brushed, someone else needs me to find some pants, or I don't know, I have dinner on the stove. So my own doing, my schedule isn't always the same. But it's important that we try and maintain as much of a schedule when it comes to our medications and into our self-care routines. It's easier said than done, I know, because with Parkinson's, especially with apathy, sometimes we don't get the opportunity, or we don't have the get up and go sometimes to do what we need to do. But if there's one thing that you take away from this talk anyway, it's to get moving in some way, shape, or form. I mean, Parkinson's disease makes us small, right? It pulls us in tighter, it flexes us. And we need to stretch, we need to be able to counteract the effects. And we talked a little bit earlier about the types of exercises, and I agree 100%. It really doesn't matter what type of exercise. It could be boxing, it could be Tai Chi, it could be swimming, it could be dancing, it could be walking. Whatever is interesting to you and will have you move regularly and with purpose, that's the important thing. Even the stretching in the chairs was a wonderful example of how you don't need to run a marathon in order to stay active in Parkinson's. So exercise. I know there are no studies that support it. I will be sort of the N of one, I guess, or the one subject that will say to you that in my own opinion, from my own experience with this disease, I feel much better when I'm moving. If I don't move, I find that whole contraction thing happens, and then everything else falls. Education is key. So he says, everything these days is .com this and .net that. I just can't stand it anymore. And the guy goes, I know a website that can help you. And that's the way our world is. I mean, even when I was working, I would have, people come in with opinions from Dr. Google all the time. It was just part and parcel of daily life that you would have this, ream of paper come in with one of your patients, which is really excellent that the information is available as long as you know what to look for, right? Because there's lots of websites that are not as reputable or relevant to your situation as others. So I think it's important to be educated on the internet, but be carefully educated on the internet. So why get educated? Well, it was alluded to earlier. We don't have a biomarker for Parkinson's disease, which is a huge problem because it's not like blood pressure or hypertension where you can go and have your blood pressure monitored, or you have diabetes, you can get your glucose monitored, and that will tell your physician how you're doing and what medications to adjust and how to do that. We don't have that for Parkinson's disease. There might be some clinical testing, maybe a rating scale, but basically it's your patient narrative, what you tell your physician, that makes the most difference in terms of what management decisions they make. So it's you. And if you're not educated about your disease, then you're not going to necessarily be able to tell them the relevant information that you're going to need in order to optimize your management. Because they can't give you a medication and then take an x-ray and say, oh yeah, it's working. They can't do that. So we need to make sure that we are educated. And you don't need an MD to be educated about your disease. You can easily do it with a certain amount of guidance in terms of where you get the information and so forth. So, for example, we know these are the cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's: resting tremor, bradykinesia, which is slow movement, rigidity, postural instability, which can lead to balance issues and falls. And these are the non-motor symptoms: anxiety, apathy, cognitive impairment, a whole host of sleep disorders, fatigue, a whole host of pain issues, smell issues, bladder dysfunction, sexual dysfunction, orthostatic hypotension, which is where your blood pressure falls when you stand, dribbling of saliva, dysphagia, constipation, nausea, vomiting. I mean, it's kind of actually depressing as well to look at that. Now, not everyone will experience this, but if you're not aware of what could potentially be because of your Parkinson's disease, then you're not going to know what to attribute it to. And you're not going to relay that information because many of these can be helped with your neurologist's intervention. If you don't know about it, you're not educated about it, then you're not going to be able to convey that information. And your information is so vital because that is really what they're going to use. I'm going to give you an example. I don't know how many of you are familiar with dystonia versus dyskinesia, because those terms are sometimes thrown around quite a bit. So I'll just take a second. Forgive me if you already know. But dystonia, I thought Michael actually said it very well in his book. So he says, I swing my legs around the side of the bed, and the instant my feet hit the floor, the two of them are in an argument. A condition called dystonia, a regular complement to Parkinson's, cramps my feet severely and curls them inward, pressing my ankles toward the floor and the soles of my feet toward each other, as though they were about to close together in prayer. That's fairly accurate, I think, description, as my experience, as I wake up to every morning. I'm not sure if you can experience in other areas. It's basically a contraction of a large muscle, so people can get it also in their necks, which contorts their head to the side as well. Dyskinesia, though, is more of a rhythmic kind of movement that can affect any part of the body, axial or limbs. And that looks very different than dystonia. Now, it is thought that more than people sort of go with the idea that dystonia happens when you don't have enough medication on board, and dyskinesia happens when you have too much medication on board. It's not entirely true. You can get dystonia when you're at the end of at the peak of your cycle or your dose, as well as the end. And dyskinesia you can get as a side effect of dopamine. So it's not as easy as knowing the difference. What's important in these two things is that you time it with your medication. So you know when you took your medication and when you experienced the symptoms, because then it makes a difference. Because if someone came in with dystonia and we just assumed that it was because they don't have enough medication, give them more medication, when in fact it was because they had too much medication, that's a whole different ballgame. Likewise with dyskinesia, right? Is it a side effect of dopamine? Well, if we saw that, it could potentially be, or it could be a product of the Parkinson's itself. So the reason I'm emphasizing these 2 points is that from my own experience, again, as a physician, I do have an advantage. I do play around with my medications a little bit. My neurologist isn't here, so I guess it's okay to say. But I use dystonia and dyskinesia a lot in terms of determining what I need to do with my medications. I'm not saying that you should do that yourself in any way, but what I am saying is that information could be a valuable resource for your physician to have in order for them to help you make the right decision about what your medication needs to do. Lesson 7, focus on your abilities. This prescription won't make you feel better, but it will stop your whining and make everyone else feel better. How true is that? I should show that one to my kids, actually. If only there was such a prescription. Focusing on your abilities. I mean, it's only natural for us to focus on our disabilities, particularly in a disease that takes away things without our permission. My husband, who's a urologist, when I first was contemplating leaving my practice, was like, oh, go for it. I mean, I could golf all day and blah, 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 and, you know, drive my car or whatever. And I said, you know what, that's fine for you to say, because it would actually, if you were to do it, it would be your choice, right? For me, it wasn't my choice. It was that this disease was taking that option away from me. And it's very natural to focus on that. But we really do have to focus more on our abilities. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn. And it's taken, I would say, I'm a very slow learner, I think. Because it's taken me, these sort of simple concepts can take a long time to actually embed themselves in your psyche. But now I look at it that, well, I can't do my career anymore that I had clinically, but I have opportunities to come and speak with great groups like you. I do a lot of international speaking as well. I have my writing. I can spend more time with my family. I reprioritize my life. So focusing on your abilities. Also focusing on your physical capabilities as well, meaning knowing that things are going to take a little longer. I was, and still am to some extent, very type A. Everything had to be done like yesterday. And now I know that I can't physically do that. So that coming about and saying, well, I can still, I might not be able to play the piano as much as I could, but I still have the musical knowledge to impart to my kids. Or I can't, play in the tennis league anymore, but I can, hit the ball around with my kids, and that's very fulfilling to me. Focusing on the abilities as opposed to what you've lost. Because when you focus on what you've lost, you lose sight of what remains. And that's a very negative place to be. It's a very damaging place to be. This is the way I feel most days. I'm afraid you have what is known as children. This is a reminder that Parkinson's does not define you. We are much more than any label, be it our disease, our finances, our relationships, our career, our life, any life circumstances. We're much more than those circumstances would label us. I mean, we are parents, we are children, we are siblings, we are friends, we are colleagues and mentors. So we're much more than what Parkinson's disease will have us believe. If you were to, say, do an experiment where you had people you knew as well as, say, strangers on the street, take a piece of paper and write down what they thought, like one-word or two-word answers as to what they thought of you. Do you think it would really be this or those? Unwell, chronically ill, disabled, sick, a burden? I think sometimes we get into that feeling that we would think that. But I would bet that it's going to be things like loving spouse, great parent, fun friend, trustworthy coworker, courageous, compassionate, outgoing, mentor, helpful, and inspiration. These are the words that we need to concentrate on, and we need to recognize that these are the words that actually define who we are. Not chronically ill, not sick, not Parkinson's disease. This is really important, and this is one thing that I speak a lot about and have been involved with a lot of actually international movements, and this is something that we really need to learn as a community of Parkinson's patients, that we are part of the solution here. She says, with this much grant money, only experiment we can do is flip a coin, and that's a sad reality of a lot of research funding. We are part of the solution. There are definitely a whole community of scientists that are looking after our best interests, that are working together to look for ultimately a cure, but also better treatments and management for us. Definitely that's there. But they can't do it without us. Actually, I'll tell you a couple of stats that really staggered me as a physician. I wasn't really aware of it. But up to 85% of clinical trials are delayed because of recruitment problems. 30% of all clinical trials in this area fail to recruit a single patient. It takes 10 to 15 years, sometimes 20, for a drug to get from the lab counter to the pharmacy shelf, and about $1 billion for a neurological drug. So in that time that we waste trying to get clinical recruitment, or some maybe really important studies that never get started because we can't recruit patients, that's a tremendous waste of time and resources. Especially time which I don't know about you, but I don't want to waste. And that's where we come in. And it doesn't have to be that you subject yourself to a drug you're not comfortable with, or surgery, or this, that, and the other. Those are important studies as well. But if you can advocate for public awareness of what needs to be done. If you can fundraise to help researchers get the funds that they need to continue their work. And if you can consider participating. There's so many different types of clinical trials that are out there that you can participate in. Some are simple surveys, some are just one sample, others are more involved. Whatever your level of comfort is, getting involved in some way, shape, or form can reduce the amount of time and resources that are wasted in this area. And the empowerment for me, because I have participated, comes from a feeling that I'm actually doing something for the community, that we are working together to find those better treatments and hopefully one day a cure. This is a lesson that is really important. You have to let go of your fear of the future in order to begin living your present. Fear is paralyzing. It's an emotion that keeps you mired in your problems and prevents you from moving forward. Michael J. Fox has said, and I don't know why I'm quoting him so much today, but he said, if you fear the worst and it happens, you've lived it twice. And if it doesn't happen, well, you've worried for nothing. And that is my hope for you, is that you continue to live your life with optimism, take action, become empowered, and take control of your present. Thank you. Those are the two books that are available on Amazon. The first one, My Grandpa's Shaky Hands, was actually illustrated by James T. Walker. He's a Hanna-Barbera illustrator, and he has Parkinson's. And he ended up teaching himself how to draw with his left hand and continued to work for a number of years. So he illustrated the first one. The second one is special to me because those are my 3 girls, and we wrote the book together. And that's for older kids. I'm talking about elementary age kids. It really talks about not just about the disease, but how children can help, how to empower them as well in this whole process.